Coming up on Lawmakers, the House agrees to let voters decide whether to fund transportation with a special local option sales tax. The Senate Appropriations Committee passes its version of the 2009 budget, restoring a pay raise for teachers and state employees. And legislation establishing transition care centers for children passes the Senate. Those stories and more are coming up next.
This is Lawmakers, your source for all the news from under the Gold Dome. Here are your anchors, and Wandy Lawson and David Zelski.
Good evening, everyone. Also on Lawmakers, the Senate Finance Committee passes a bill that will use a car tag fee to fund trauma care. Also a bill that places life-saving devices in many public high schools passes the Senate.
And the Senate Appropriations Committee votes to compensate a man who served over 21 years in a Georgia prison for a crime he didn't commit. But first, our top story tonight, a local transportation tax bill gets action from both the House and Senate. After a lengthy debate, the State House passes a constitutional amendment to allow voters to tax themselves for local transportation projects. Lawmakers Sandra Parrish now joins us live with the latest. Sandra.
In Wandy, as passed today in the House, Senate Resolution 845 allows voters to go to the polls in November to decide if they want 12 regional development centers to come up with local projects that voters could in turn choose to pay a penny sales tax to fund. Individual counties could opt out.
I sincerely believe that this is very, very important to your constituents. Even just to have the opportunity to come together as communities, as regions, to sit down and talk about transportation.
The three-hour debate brought both Republicans and Democrats together.
Anyone who drives around Atlanta knows that we have got to do something in transportation. Anybody who drives around the rural areas of this state know that we've got to do something for county contracts and cities and intersections to be able to let all of our communities grow in this state.
All over this state, millions of people sit in various forms of traffic, and it's killing us. It's clogging our arteries, just like heart disease does. And yes, news flash to everybody, if you want to do something about transportation, it is going to cost money. Nothing in life's free, and somebody's got to pay for it. Who better to decide if you pay for it than the people in a region?
But the idea of a tax increase, which Governor Perdue has come out against, caused some Republicans to vote against their own party.
The governor said, and I agree with this, that at the same time that we're talking about doing a tax cut, here we are talking about a tax increase. It's silly. He's right about that. What are we about here? Are we about trying to return some of those hard-earned dollars to the taxpayers? Or are we about trying to get more squeezed out of them?
The bill was immediately transmitted to the Senate, which promptly voted to disagree.
We've got a very strong position in the Senate. We will hold firm, but also have a very willingness to understand more of the House's position.
Rather than RDCs, the Senate's version calls for counties to come together or for an individual county to propose a sales tax referendum. The Metro and State Chambers of Commerce say they'll work with both sides to help resolve the differences.
Okay. Thank you very much. Well, after a week of cramming numbers, the Senate Appropriations Committee passed their version of the 09 budget. Appropriations Chairman Jack Hill goes through a few of the major changes to HB 990, which he says restores money to the people who serve the state.
This budget focuses on education, not on funding for a few, but funding for all systems across the state. You know, when we passed the 2008 budget, amended budget, I stated on the floor that we were making a down payment on restoring the austerity cuts to education. This budget restores some $56 million in austerity cuts to school systems across the state. Now, we would have restored more, but for two actions by the House that the Senate had to address. You've probably read of a letter by Governor Perdue confirming that the House budget is unbalanced. Some $17 million is added to the revenue totals that the governor confirms represents an increase in the revenue estimate. So to balance, we started out in the hole, so to speak, by some $17 million. And we had to replace the funds the House spent in their budget. By the way, it also didn't make sense to take money away from the ports in Savannah and Brunswick, the very economic engine that has kept up with double-digit increases right on through the downturn in the economy. So that part didn't make sense either. The second loss we had to make up was unconscionable cuts of over $20 million to the Department of Corrections and the Department of Human Resources. Capricious and arbitrary cuts with literally no basis for making. Some call them grudge cuts. We're not in the business in the Senate of preventing the Department of Corrections from protecting the public. We have the highest growth rate of inmates in the country for a state our size. The department doesn't control who is sentenced to the Department of Corrections, and they don't control who is released as well. And the Senate is not going to stand by and watch prisons close because of personality conflicts. We're going to ensure the public is protected. So the Senate budget started out some $37 million in the hole that we had to make up before we addressed our priorities. But we have done that, and you see here the results of that work.
The Senate version also restores the set 2.5% pay raises for teachers and state employees, which were originally trimmed down in the governor's version of the budget. HB 990 passed the Senate and now goes to Senate rules. Well, soon after the Senate adjourned this afternoon, Lawmakers Sandra Parrish caught up with Lieutenant Governor Cagle for his opinions on the Senate changes to the 09 budget.
We had to make sure we passed the balanced budget, and certainly we have done what's constitutionally required of us. We take the budgetary process very seriously in the Senate and have had a very strong reputation on making sure that it's fiscally sound. And we believe we've done that, and we'll have a lot of issues to talk about through the conferees and the conference committee, but I feel very confident we can get a resolve.
That money coming out of the austerity, is that going to cause a problem?
It'll be an issue of debate, no doubt, and the House has staked out their position, but we're not that far apart.
In other news, a measure establishing transition care centers for medically fragile children passed the Senate today. Lawmakers' Bridget Snapp is live with more. Bridget.
In Wandy, House Bill 984 creates temporary facilities for sick children who are ready to leave the hospital but are dependent on life-sustaining medications and equipment. Such facilities would assist the children and their families with the transition from the hospital to their home or other appropriate setting. Senator Don Balfour, who carried the bill in the Senate, explains the need for such centers.
There was one child that was at Eggleston for over 4 years. This person was medically fragile, and there literally was no place to put this child. Eggleston's had people there for 2.5 years, 2 or 3 children who have been there for a long waiting period. And these children at Eggleston who are medically fragile and there's no place to place them, under Medicaid would cost around $1,400 a year. $1,400 a day.
Senator Balfour went on to explain how the centers would work.
And you can bring the child there rather than Eggleston, rather than Scottish Rite, at a cost of half as much. And this child can be there for a short period of time. The idea is to keep that child there for a short period of time and teach the parents how to take care of this medically fragile child, or teach the foster parents how to take care of this medically fragile child, so that we can then place them out in the community, which is really the best place for these kids to begin with. This bill sets up a licensure for transitional care centers. And this would help children in the state of Georgia. It also helps the state of Georgia. The state of Georgia would be saving 50% of the money. The kids are going to be taken care of better. The parents are going to be able to be taught on a short-term basis how to take care. I mean, we're talking about, it's hard to imagine how medically fragile these kids are.
The bill passed unanimously and now heads back to the House due to some changes made in a Senate committee. Reporting live, I'm Bridget Snapp for Lawmakers.
Thanks so much, Bridget. The Senate Finance Committee today gave a do-pass recommendation to a bill that would introduce a $10 tag fee to fund trauma care in Georgia. Lawmakers' Andy Dixon has more on this story.
House Bill 1158 passed the House earlier this month and must now be taken up by House rules. The money will go to maintaining and expanding the current trauma care network.
House Bill 1158 was a big attempt to finally fund the Trauma Care Trust Fund. It's expensive. We're needing about $74 to $90 million to constantly and sustainably keep trauma care fixed in the state of Georgia. The dollars that we're going to put in there, of course, we have to, according to the bill it is now, we're going to have to appropriate those monies every year anyway. But to dedicate these monies, subject to appropriation, should bring in about $74 to $80 million a year.
Georgia has 4 Level 1 trauma care centers designed for the most serious injuries, one of which is the cash-strapped Grady Memorial Hospital. If passed by the Senate and signed into law by the governor, Georgians will be able to vote on the matter in November. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Andy Dixon.
The Senate today passed a bill that requires at least one defibrillator to be placed in most high schools across the state. Senator and Dr. Don Thomas explains the legislation and how to work the device.
House Bill 1031 authorizes and actually demands that the schools, all high schools in Georgia, make AEDs available in all of the schools. I brought one along today, but other states that have passed this legislation, New York, 38 lives have been saved since '02, Ohio, 13 lives, Georgia, 21 lives, Tennessee 6, and 22 sudden cardiac arrests. And I brought this one along today for you to see. You simply turn it on, and the first thing you do call for help now. Is call for help. And that means a 911 call while you attach the electrodes and get things started. I think everyone is probably pretty familiar with this, and unless there's questions, I just urge your support of the legislation. If there are no questions, I will yield the way.
There are no questions, Senator. You didn't shock yourself while you was doing that, did you?
You know, I failed to mention that, Mr. President. There's no way for you to shock yourself with this. It tells you what to do, when to do it, and it will not shock the patient unless they're in ventricular fibrillation and need to be shocked.
That's awesome. What to do, when to do it. Maybe I need that machine on a regular basis.
Well, HB 1031 passed 47-0, receiving no changes, so it now goes to Governor Perdue.
Well, the House today agrees to allow limousine drivers to sell alcohol to their passengers, but Representative Earl Earhart said the bill does not extend to statewide Sunday sales.
Subsection B also would keep limousine carriers from furnishing alcohol on a day or time that's not lawful. In other words, if you're in a county that's a dry county, or if the city or the county forbids purchasing or selling alcohol, or such sale is unlawful, then they couldn't do it. But when you're driving around, they have the ability to continue to partake of that alcoholic beverage, but very clearly only if you're over 21.
Since we're expanding alcohol sales to limousine and other carriers, shouldn't we also expand alcohol sales to Sunday?
Representative Benefield, this is not Sunday sales, as you well know. You can, you may have a chance later on in the session to make that point.
I hope so. Thank you.
Senate Bill 385 passed 128 to 26. The House also agreed to a Senate substitute to anti-dogfighting legislation.
It sets in place a way for the House or the Senate, upon notification of rules from any agency within state government that we have legislative oversight of, to have the ability to stay any rule that may be proposed and by the committee, and then when we come back into session the next legislative year, sets into place a process also for a resolution to be adopted within the first 30 days. And if that resolution is adopted, then it will take effect by negating the rule that has been objected to.
Isn't it true that we are not being consistent with our state agencies in terms of their compliance with the Administrative Procedures Act? And there are other state agencies like the Department of Human Resources that passes actions and policies with no oversight and no Administrative Procedure Act review. Isn't that true, sir?
If the lady, I believe the lady knows of which she speaks.
And isn't it true, sir, that it would be good for us as the General Assembly to be consistent in relation to the other agencies that are avoiding APA review?
I would agree to that also.
Thank you, sir.
And that footage, of course, was actually debate about a bill to allow additional oversight for the State Environmental Protection Division. Apologize for that error. The House did today table action on a measure to further online defensive driving classes online. A lot of the debate centered around whether or not to create a mandatory charge for these courses.
Because there are bricks and mortar classrooms in place, a number of these people would have a difficulty reconciling a price that's lower than $75 and being able to give the course. Now, these are the same people that do the DUI risk reduction course, and they need to be kept in place. So the price was originally set at $75. I think we ought to keep it there for 2 years and then adjust it so that it floats on the online course not more than $45 or not more than $75.
Gentleman, further yield.
I do.
With all due respect, Mr. Chairman, I mean, wouldn't the market take care of that when you say that these vendors would have a hard time adjusting to a downward price? No one's saying they have to lower their prices. All they're saying now is under current law, they cannot. It would be against the law to lower their price. Is that correct?
Well, I think history is the proof of this. What happened several years ago when the course price did float, competitive schools opened up on the other side of the street and forced the schools that were long-standing DUI schools and defensive driving schools and driver education schools out of business because they effectively took that portion of the market away from them.
And a motion to withdraw that particular amendment meant that the bill went back to the general calendar.
A bill that clarifies licensing provisions for adult day centers also passed the Senate today. Senator Renee Unterman explains these centers and why House Bill 1044 is needed.
In your community, you may have had churches or small groups actually go into the business, even though it's a nonprofit, of taking care of the elderly. A good example of this would be when a family is taking care of a grandparent, a mother or a father, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they would like to have the ability to have some free time on their own so that they can go to the drugstore, they could go to Walmart, or they could just stay at home and not have to take care of someone with Alzheimer's for 6 hours. So what it amounts to is like a babysitting service where they would drop that loved one off at a church facility and they would take care of the loved one for 6 or 7 hours. It's a wonderful program. We're trying to promote it across the whole state so that more churches will actually have this as an affiliation of their church. They have a very strong lobbying group throughout the whole state. We're very proud of these volunteers and what they're doing. They're actually saving health care dollars and also keeping their loved ones at home, which is the most important aspect of the program.
House Bill 1044 passed unanimously with a Senate committee substitute and now goes back to the House.
We'd like to take a moment to recommend a website that's a valuable resource for information about the Georgia General Assembly. Go to www.legis.ga.gov. That website's a great research tool that we at Lawmakers use on a regular basis.
After serving 21 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit, Pete Williams moves one step closer to receiving $1.2 million from the state. H.R. 1078, which passed the Senate Appropriations Committee today, is part of the Innocence Project, where DNA evidence proves the innocence of people serving sentences for crimes they did not commit. Senator Horacina Tate explains Mr. Williams' story. However, Senator Bill Cowser believes compensation for Mr. Williams isn't a responsibility of the states.
Unfortunately, when he was sentenced, the crimes, and while he was in jail, the crimes continued to go on. There was another person that happened to be arrested later on, a Mr. Wicker, and he was charged with 3 of the attacks. As with all the other compensation pieces that we've had to date, DNA is responsible for determining that Mr. Wicker was the person that actually committed these crimes versus Mr. Williams. In 1998, after having served 14 years in prison, Mr. Williams came up for parole. He was told that he could get parole if he would say that he had committed the crime and also would have to go on the sex offenders registry. Mr. Williams said he had not committed the crime, and so he would not at that point say he did something he had not done, so he served another 9 years in prison.
It's intended for cases where somebody has been hurt by wrongdoing on the part of the state. And as we heard testimony in this subcommittee, there is no allegation that the state of Georgia or the prosecution did anything improper in this case. There was no prosecutorial misconduct. They did not withhold evidence. They didn't fabricate evidence. The defendant was adequately represented by counsel here. There were just 3 eyewitnesses that were wrong, apparently. There's no question that this man was innocent, but it's not due to the fault of the state. And if we compensate in these cases year after year, we are acting as an insurance company for breakdowns in the justice system in this country. There was testimony in that committee that we have approximately 5% of our inmates that are innocent, that were wrongfully convicted for one reason or another. Do the math on that, that's over 2,500 inmates. If we give each one of them $1 million or more when this is discovered, you're talking about $2.5 billion in obligations of the state of Georgia that we do not have a legal obligation to pay that.
H.R. 1078 passed committee 16-7 and now goes over to Senate rules. Well, 2 bills establishing new educational scholarships passed out of committee yesterday. SB 458 requires school systems that lose accreditation or are deemed needs improvement schools for 7 years offer their students vouchers. The vouchers can be used at public or private schools. The bill passed the House Science and Technology Committee and heads to House Rules. The second bill, HB 1133, creates nonprofit student scholarship organizations that provide vouchers for public school students to use at private schools. It passed the Senate Finance Committee and now heads to Senate Rules.
The House and Senate today agreed to a new schedule, adjourning the General Assembly sine die on April 4th. But some House members questioned whether this will be possible in light of reports that Governor Perdue will lower the 2009 revenue estimate and veto the budget passed in the House last week because it exceeds the governor's projections by $17 million.
At this point in time, that's speculation. I couldn't venture a guess as to what we may or may not do. Our intent and the Senate's intent is to live by this resolution. And if this House adopts this resolution, this House would then have to adopt another resolution to change it, regardless of what the other chamber did. So I think by us adopting this resolution, we are putting in place that says we're committed to get our work done and be out of here by next Friday. And as you know, things happen that we don't have control of. I, like you, are a member of the legislative branch, and I think it's important that we meet the responsibilities of our branch, and what happens outside that's really out of our control.
It's been revealed that former Representative Ron Saylor, who last week pled guilty to money laundering charges, also accepted money from a payday lobbyist. At issue, an $80,000 loan Saylor received from payday lobbyist Willie Green 1 day before Saylor voted with 16 other House Banks and Banking Committee members in favor of legalizing payday lending in Georgia. Saylor was also one of 11 Democrats who crossed party lines to support the bill on the House floor when it failed on a tie vote. And the State Ethics Committee will continue its investigation of that loan. Saylor will be sentenced in May. The House Judiciary Civil Committee today tabled Senate Bill 449. The bill would limit liability for certain landowners who permit their property to be used for recreation or agritourism purposes, such as hunting or fishing, from visitors who may be harmed on their property. Supporters of the bill include the Agribusiness Council, Georgia Farm Bureau, and the Georgia Heritage and Wildlife Council. Speaking against the bill was the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association, which believes it's legalized unreasonable behavior, especially because the property usage is for profit. Again, the House Judiciary Committee tabled SB 449. There was no word on when the bill might be heard again.
A collaboration of clean air organizers revved up their campaign for a new filter that can reduce diesel pollution. Lawmakers Mina Hosseini joined them at the Capitol this morning and has the story.
Not only am I a state representative, but I'm also a mom, and I'm a member of Mothers and Others for Clean Air. I have a son with asthma.
and he walks to school every day, and we walk by the school buses emitting these noxious fumes. So we want to clean up our school buses and clean up our air.
Dr. Bruce Hill and other environmental advocates say that the filter can reduce pollution by up to 90%. They met with legislators at the Capitol to urge funding to place this filter on school buses in the state of Georgia. Dr. Hill's demonstration showed the significant difference in diesel emissions once the filter was put into place.
The particle filter on this bus works so well that it reduces the levels from the tailpipe to 20 times lower than the particles in the outdoor air. The emissions coming out of this bus are right now 1/60th of what's in the outdoor air that we're breathing right now.
A representative from the Georgia Clean Diesel campaign said that getting funding for the filter is their biggest and final hurdle. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Mina Hosseini.
Beautiful melodies filled the north wing of the Capitol today as the America's Sumter High School singers paid a visit. Lawmakers' Kyle Hood tunes us in.
From Southeast Georgia came a talented group of young people. The American Sumter High School singers performed a medley of songs for the Capitol today. Senator George Hooks welcomed the kids from his district as he stayed to take pictures with the singers. Reporting for Lawmakers, I'm Kyle Hood.
Syndicated country music radio personality Moby in the Morning was in the House this morning. He told representatives that this visit was a career highlight.
I've sung the national anthem for the Atlanta Braves on 15 separate occasions, for the Atlanta Hawks, for the Thrashers, but nothing compares in my 37 years of radio experience to the honor of being invited to this esteemed body to receive this resolution with my family in tow. I wish my mom and daddy were still alive to see this. Thank you very, very much. God bless America. God bless this great nation and keep her strong. And I don't have anything else to say. If you'll listen to the show, God love you. 106.1 out of Athens, 107.1 out of Rome, and 92.5 out of Griffin. We got Atlanta surrounded. Yeah, baby. God bless you. Could I get a yeah, baby from the house? Yeah, all right. That's cool.
Yeah, baby. Well, coming up tomorrow on Lawmakers, the FY 2009 budget could be taken up on the Senate floor, and it's the end of another legislative week at the Capitol, so we'll take a look back at this week under the Gold Dome. We'll have those stories and all the latest Capitol news tomorrow night on Lawmakers at 7 p.m. And if you have missed any part of this Lawmakers broadcast, tune in tomorrow when Lawmakers repeats at 5:30 a.m. You can also keep up with all of the action under the Gold Dome on your local GPB radio station during Morning Edition, All Things Considered, and evenings at 6 p.m. on Georgia Gazette. Now, stay tuned for the latest high school sports news with Prep Sports Plus. That program is next on GPB.
And that's our broadcast for the 35th Legislative Day. I'm Inwani Lawson. Good night.
I'm David Selsky. Good night.
This has been a production of Georgia Public Broadcasting.